Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Weekend with Wisdom. And today we have again Dr. Suresh Deshpande ji, and he will be continuing his yesterday's session on Maya in Advaita Vedanta. Yesterday he shared he cleared many of the fundamental misconceptions about Maya, and with examples from science and scientific frameworks, he illustrated the various aspects of Maya, and he will continue this enunciation today as well. Very warm welcome to Dr. Suresh ji. Thank you for coming on our show. Viewers, if you have any questions from yesterday or even from today, you can post it on Q&A box, and in the final 10-15 minutes, Dr. Deshpande will take up those questions. So with this, very to start his session.
Thank you, Nitin. So continuation. So first I start with my favorite mantra or shloka from Isha Vasyopanishad. Hiranmayena patrena satyasya apihitam mukham tattvam pushan apavrunu satya dharmaya drishtaye. It's a prarthana to the Lord, to the God Almighty, that please help us in marching towards the truth, for seeing the truth, for understanding the truth. Satya dharmaya drashtaya. We understand that the truth is covered kind of metaphorically in a golden pot. So again, we request the God Almighty to do anugraha, help us in understanding the truth. A wonderful prarthana which makes you a humble seeker of truth. So let us take today some more examples of science to illustrate those technical terms I introduced last time. Badhyogya, worthy of being falsified. Badhita prameya, falsified hypothesis. Jnana nivartya, sublated by additional knowledge. Avarana, covering, the truth is covered. And vikshepa, it appears other way. So let us take some examples now to understand more these technical terms of Acharya. In ancient times, it was believed that the sun god in the heavens, in the antariksha, in the sky, sits in a chariot, ratha, and the Sarasi is Arun. That's why we use the word Arunodaya. And the chariot is pulled by 7 horses. Here is a statement from Rigveda. Sapta yunjanti rathameka chakrameko ashvo vahati saptanama. So 7 horses being pulling the chariot, and the sun god moves in the sky. In other ancient civilizations also, they believed that there are celestial chariots moving in the heavens or the sky. Seeing the movement of stars, planets, and sky, the ancients thought about celestial chariots, ratha. And that was their model for the movement of the heavenly bodies. Even Lord Indra had a Sarathi charioteer called Matali. It was quite natural for the ancients to have such a simple model. This very simple model was later on given up by our astronomers during the Vedanga Jyotisha period. Each one of us who observe the sky in the night see that the nakshatra mandala rises in the east, slowly moves, come over the top of the head and sets in the west. This goes on day in, day out. So the curiosity was aroused as to why the nakshatra mandala rotates. This is our pratiti. This is our experience. Any one of you can experience this in the night sky, particularly in a small village where there is no background illumination. You can see this every day. The revolution of the nakshatra mandala, this is our pratiti. Pratiti means our experience. This observation led to what is called as geocentric model. That is, the earth is at the center of the universe, and there is a khagola, a celestial sphere. In astronomy, it is called as a celestial sphere because our eyes cannot see which star is farther, which star is closer. They are so far away that the binocular vision fails to see the depth. So it appears as if there is a celestial sphere or a khagola on which these stars, planets move, and we can make angular measurements. We cannot really measure the distances, but we can see their angles changing. So the geocentric model was used to do some calculations. There are various calculations, which star will be visible when, which planet will be in which nakshatra, and so on. And these calculations have to agree with observations. Thus was born among the Indian astronomers a very, very important principle called Druk Ganita Aikya. Ganita is the calculation. Druk is the observation. And Aikya, the calculations must agree with the observations. Even today, the agreement between calculations based on theory and observation is a very fundamental cornerstone of modern science. And the beautiful term for that is Druk Ganita Aikya. The idea of writing the Janma Kundali was born at this time, and even now I maintain Jataka is the best record about the time and the place where a certain person is born. If you have Jataka today of anybody born centuries ago, using these computational programs, we can exactly find out the latitude, longitude, and the time of birth. The Phala Jyotisha came later. I am referring to only the Jyotisha, the astronomical aspect. And we had those famous nakshatras, Ashwini, Bharani, etc. Just I will quote, Kshitije Udayan Rashihi Lagnam Shat. At the time of birth, the Rashi, which is just on the horizon, is called your Lagna. Simha Lagna, Mesha Lagna, Makara Lagna, and so on. So Aryabhatta, Brahmagupta, Bhaskara, these famous astronomers of India, had their own Ganita, their own calculational method. So what we call today as an underlying mathematical model. So you see here, there is an observation, the movement of the nakshatras and the planets. And there is an underlying mathematical model, a hypothetical model. Today it is called as axiomatic system. And this Ganita, this mathematical model, is used in calculating. The most interesting aspect in science is that the underlying mathematical model keeps changing. It is not the same. The pratiti is the same. That is the most important part. But the underlying mathematical model keeps changing as more and more research is done and more intelligent people look into what is the best underlying mathematical model. Thus, an underlying mathematical model of planetary motion explaining some observations gives way or is replaced by some other underlying model, and that is called as Jnana Nivartana. The earlier model is sublated and replaced by another model because the some calculations of earlier model are false, don't agree with observation. So that is called as Badhayogya. So every mathematical model is Badhayogya, falsifiable outside its range of validity. Again, because Druk Ganita Aikya, we want our Ganita to do calculations, and these calculations must agree with experiments and observations. I wish that this concept of Druk Ganita Aikya is taught to children in school at a very young age. How important, rational, scientific our ancient masters have been. Soon, the geocentric model, because of its deficiencies, was replaced by a heliocentric model. And the heliocentric model led to the Kepler's laws. That was again replaced by the 17th century Newtonian mechanics, what is today called as classical physics or classical mechanics. In Sanskrit, it is called as Abhijata Vijnana. So many equations, that is, more mathematics came into the picture in the underlying mathematics. Kepler's laws then were deduced as deductions from Newtonian classical mechanics. But every time there must be agreement between calculations and observation. So you see, our pratiti is the same, movement of the nakshatra mandala, angular position, but the underlying mathematical model, which is inferred by human brain, we call it Anumanajanya Paroksha Jnana. It is Anumanajanya, based on inference. Paroksha, because there is no direct perception of that. And this Anumanajanya Paroksha Jnana, Shankaracharya says in Kathopanishad, Nahi tarkasthanistha kuchit vidyate, tarko apatishtaha. Tarka is not very definite. One tarka is replaced by another tarka. So between us, who directly pursue, our indriyas directly pursue what is happening in the outside world, and then using our buddhi, we find out this underlying mathematical model which we hold to be real. That's why Sage Vidyaranya, in his Panchadashi, he is famous for his Panchadashi. He was the guru of the Bukkaraya, Harihara and Bukkaraya, Hakka Bukka, founders of the Vijayanagara Empire. He says, Na prachitihi tayo badaha kintu mithyatva nishchayaha. Your prachiti is not falsified. What we have seen, the movement of the nakshatra mandala and their angular positions, that is not falsified. Na prajatihi tayo badha mithyatva nishchaya. But what is falsified, what is considered mithya, as the underlying hypothetical inferential mathematical model. That is an important part. So yesterday somebody asked, Maya is an illusion. No, the pratit is not falsified. What is falsified is our inferential hypothesis. Karyanumeya iti maya is that what Shankaracharya said. So the Newtonian mechanics was very successful. ISRO, whenever it launches its satellites, they do all these calculations based on Newtonian mechanics. With Newtonian mechanics, because it uses advanced mathematics, so many aspects can be calculated. What is called as Earth is not a perfect sphere. So you can take that into account. in calculating the orbital motion of a satellite. Then you can calculate additional gravity forces called the lunisolar perturbation, and even more long-term effects, the gravitational effects of other planets. Essentially today what is called as, we can solve a multi-body problem. So the present mathematical model of Newton is much more capable, and it uses strange mathematical objects. At that time appeared very strange. I mentioned some of them: integration, differentiation, ordinary differential calculus, and so on, integrating that with time, finding solution, and thus led the triumph of Abhijata Vidya. People believed that now we have reached kind of ultimate. It was called as the philosophy of mechanistic determinism. If you know the initial conditions, you can find out what the planetary position would be the next moment, and so on and so on. So this particular position was called as mechanistic determinism. Everything is determined. A lot of research and observation is required to get correct and accurate models, and the research goes on. So you see here also the truth, so-called the best mathematical model or the ultimate mathematical model, is hidden from us. And a lot of research is required to keep on uncovering various layers. Tattvam Pushanna Apavranu. Help me in opening Apavranu. So you see, every time scientists are given a mathematical model, there is a vikshepa. Vikshepa means what is not caught by us, but some approximation to that. And that's why I use the word asanna khyati, better and better and better. So the truth is extremely mysterious. Gudha. Kathopanishad says, Esha sarveshu bhuteshu gudhotmana prakashate drishyate tvagriya buddhya sukshmaya sukshmadarshabhi. Esha, this is very gudha. Na prakashate, does not reveal easily. But those who are endowed with sukshmadarshi prajna, those who can go very deep. So those who can do sthula sukshma viveka, sthula sukshma vichara, I have given the name Sukshmadarshi Prajna. Those who have this Sukshmadarshi Prajna, slowly, step by step, they will go to this good ultimate reality. It does not reveal. So Ishavasyopanishad, Kathopanishad, Shankariya Darshan, Brahma Sutra, all of them say the same thing, that the truth is covered from us. So we have seen from observation and experimental data, we infer postulates, hypotheses, and in the modern day world, it is called an axiomatic system. There are 3 laws of Newton and the universal principle of gravitation. Actually, who has seen gravitation? When you learn the gravitation that sun pulls the earth, actually, there is no long string connecting. In your day-to-day life, you push something, you pull something. If that thing is far away, there is a string connecting your hand with that particular matter, and then you pull or push. But here, there is no such thing. So how come, people asked, sitting far away, crores of miles away, sun exerts the gravitational force, which was in scientific philosophy called as action at a distance. Something far away suddenly exerts a force. It was considered very mysterious. And this mystery of the gravitation led Einstein to do his own research, yet another mathematical model for the same reality. So the reality is really very complex, very good, very mysterious, and kind of covered from us, doesn't reveal. Tarko apatishtaha is what Yudhishthira said in answer to Yaksha, Ko panthaha tarko apratishtaha. Acharya added, Nahi tarkascha nishtha kvachit vidyate. Anyatha anumayam iti chet. If another person comes forward with another hypothesis, then the earlier hypothesis is sublated. This is the effect of Maya, in the sense that we don't grasp the ultimate reality. Now, one more interesting technical point. I have a lot to say, but just one instant technical point. Newton's laws state that every body continues to be in a state of rest forever or a state of uniform motion in a straight line unless there is a force acting on it. Now, nothing around you moves in a straight line. A cricket ball hit comes to rest. Everything moves along a curved path. Earth moves along a curved path. A tiger chases a deer along a curved path. So what you see, I have never seen anything moving in a straight line forever. So you see, what you do not see, he considered as a law. So what you see around us, everything comes to a rest, everything moves along a curved path, everything has a different velocity. This is what you see, this is your pratiti. But he, to explain this, he abandoned that as a law, jahat lakshana. Instead accepted that everything continues to be in a state of rest or uniform motion for. So you reject something, you accept something. Newton's laws are very unnatural. That's what you don't see at all. So it is very similar to what is called as so ayam devadattaha. One very famous example is given that somebody from Kashi called Devadatta was identified later even though the outer things changed. So I think in science, as I yesterday said, P.W. Anderson, Nobel Prize winner, said, they act like big priests. No, not this, but that. Jahat ajahat lakshana. What you see, something coming to rest, moving along a curved path, no. The fundamental laws are everything continues to be in a state of rest. Momentum, second law, and so on. Again, Newton was able to perceive beyond what he sees around him and able to formulate his mathematical model. So what is obvious, prakata, is not the truth. What is not obvious, behind that, there is this mathematical model, which has the power of Druk Ganita Aikya, the highest predictability power. But that is Gupta, hidden from us. Let us go to a step further. After the fantastic success of classical mechanics, Avijat Vijnana, people thought that we have more or less reached the ultimate. Idam Nishtha Vijnana progressed because they were only considering Idam. Fantastic success of the classical mechanics. And one of the statements made by Acharya, Jnanam Vastu Tantram, Natu Purusha Tantram. So this concept of objective reality. An object has properties independent of the observer. Vastu Tantram iti Jnanam, or the concept of objective reality. Mind and matter in classical physics were separated. It was Idam Nishtha, not Aham Nishtha Vijnana. Acharya has said that there is a neat classification of Idam Nishtha Jnana and Aham Nishtha Jnana. And both of them have their own avidya, in the sense that the ultimate truth behind the Idam, the ultimate truth behind the Aham are hidden from us. In classical physics, the mind was just a passive observer, lying outside, just observe. Needs separation Jnata and Jnaya. Also, there was the concept of there's a background space, obeying the principles of Euclidean geometry, and things move in this background space, collide, move, etc. the geometry of the space and time was thought to be Euclidean in the Newtonian mechanics. Space is infinite, flat. But we know this hypothesis was negated. Again, sublation took place. This particular mathematics, you know that the distance between 2 points is based on a Pythagorean theorem, and that led to the what is called as Euclidean geometry. A side remark, the Indian ancient mathematicians had proved Pythagoras' theorem to a different yukti. It's an extremely important yukti, mixing up algebra and geometry. A very clever argument. Yukti is clever argument. Yukti moolam itu shastram. That's what one old Siddhanta said. This shastram is yukti moolam. A very intelligent, clever proof. There were two famous Kerala mathematicians called Neelakantha and Madhava, who did a lot of research in calculating the value of pi. And they gave this mantra, Yukti Moolam itu Shastram. Even a crawling child knows that the space is Euclidean. A crawling baby, if you keep an object in front of the baby, it does not chase the object along a curved path. It knows that the sum of the two angles of a triangle is greater than the third. So the concept of Euclidean geometry is imprinted in our nature, hardwired. And further research showed that the geometry of the world is not Euclidean. There is no absolute space, there is no absolute time, even though these were the bedrock of the Newtonian framework. So again, further research changed our hypothetical model. Again, Jnana Nivarta, again Bhajyogya. The process goes on. Similarly, the concept of objective reality. What exists outside us, that padartha, that object, has properties like temperature, position, volume, density, independent of the observer. That was the concept of OR, objective reality. People firmly believed in this OR. Existence of an object independent of the observer is the bedrock of the concept of objective reality. Vastu tantram iti, na purusha tantram. And we again know that this objective reality is our prachiti matra, it is our prachiti. I can keep a pot of water on the table, go out somewhere, and still the water will be there. The water will have the same volume, same density. Maybe temperature changes because of some cooling, but it has properties independent of the observer. This was our pratiti, means experience. But this mathematical model, based on concept of objective reality, absolute space, absolute time, they were shattered as more research took place. At this time, another question came in the minds of those who study philosophy of science, that what is this mathematics? What are those mathematical objects? They are strange. They are not indriya gochar. They are buddhi gochar. They are atindriya. Can anybody feel a complex number? Can I touch a complex number? But in electrical engineering, we use it all the time. The impedance of a circuit is a complex number. In quantum mechanics, we use it all the time. In fluid mechanics also we use the concept of complex numbers. But are they real? Are these mathematical objects real? Such important questions started bothering the people. If you say these mathematical objects are not real, then the nature is described by these mathematical models. We are able to do calculation. So there is one theory, it's called as shut up and calculate. Don't ask what is the meaning of these mathematical models. They work. You can use them for prediction, reliable prediction. So a philosophical question was born, and I will not come to it here now because there is no time. that these Indriya, Agochara, Buddhigamya mathematical concepts are they real? Are they padarthas? I think a separate lecture is required to answer this question. We have to go to various fields. But let me tell you, the modern science is full of these strange mathematical models. Infinite dimensional spaces. Where is the infinite dimensional space? N-dimensional vectors. Where are they? I can't see. So many are there. So I distinguish between Indriya Gochara Padartha and Indriya Agochara Padartha. Indriya Gochara Padartha by Saint Ramdas is called as Prakata, and Indriya Agochara Padartha is called as Aprakata, Gupta, and that is extremely useful in doing calculations about the Indriya Gochara Padartha. So behind this Indriya Gochara Padartha, the object seen by the senses, lies a very subtle theory, a subtle mathematical theory which works. So is that the reality? If you say it is not the reality, then it works. Satcheta na badhyeta. If it is true, then it cannot be falsified. Asatcheta na pratyeta. If it is asat, then it should not become object of experience. If this mathematical object is regarded as asat, then how come it works? And if this mathematical object is regarded as sat, then how come after some time it is replaced by another and the earlier one is falsified? So thus was born the concept of third category, anirvachaniya iti maya. I will come to this question again. Soon it became clear that the concept of objective reality is shattered. Absolute space is shattered. Gravitational force shattered. Instead of sun exerting a gravitating force on Earth, Einstein replaced that by the curved space-time. The space is curved. Again, that is another abstract mathematical idea. So old hypothetical model was replaced by new model, and the process goes on forever. It's very interesting that Gita says, Indriyani parani ahuhu. The Indriyas are superior to the Prakriti, to the nature around you. Indriyabhyaha param manaha. And the mind is superior to the organs. Manasastu para buddhe. The buddhi is beyond that. And yo buddhe parasastu saha. And that ultimate truth, Atma, is beyond buddhi also. So starting from the Indriya Gochara Srishti, step by step, step by step, step by step, in the Satya Samshodhana Prakriya, we are going towards something beyond everything. We find rules of change, but rules of change in the Prakriti keep changing. A new model comes, and all these models are Atindriya, cannot be seen by Indriyas, but they still have a reality in the sense described before. And that's why what I told in the first lecture, Mama Maya Durattaya is true. Now, there is a lot I have to say, but today I have to wind up something. So I will not touch upon the other aspect called Apavargartham Drishyam. Yoga Darshan talks about Drishya, Prakasha Kriya Sthitichilam Bhogartham Apavargartham Drishyam. The Indian tradition says that Drishya is not only for Bhoga, idam, but Apavargartham also. So why it is said that? While the Western tradition said that the nature and its creations are meant for enjoyment and domination, but the Indian tradition says Apavargartham iti Drishyam. It is also meant for Apavarga and Moksha, but I will not talk about that. I will emphasize one point, that our experience is called Pratiti Matra Satta. It has satta because we experience it. But the mathematical model underlying this prakriti keeps changing. That gets falsified. And hence Vidyaranya statement that na prakriti tayo bhagaha kintu mithyatva nishchayaha. Something is falsified but not prakriti. I will end this particular section with a statement by Karl Popper, a mathematical logician of the last century. Karl Raimund Popper, 1902 to 1994, he wrote an essay called The Logic of Research. He made this spectacular statement which closely agrees with what Acharya said. Scientific inferences are all deductive, either from a conjectural premises to a falsifiable consequence, or from a falsified consequence to the negation of the conjunction of the premises. Very complicated statement. You start with some premises and you make deductions, and you find that these deductions are no longer true, no longer agree with the observation. So because the deductions are falsified by observation, your premises are also falsified. All science progresses this way, sir. I have a lot more to say on this, but again, for want of time, I move on. What Karl Popper has said is exactly what Acharya used the word yatra yatra jnana nivartam tatra tatra mithyatvam yatha shukti rajatadau. Whatever is sublated by more knowledge, yatra yatra jnana nivartam tatra tatra mithyatvam. That which is sublated by additional knowledge, its mithyatvam has been proved yatha shukti rajatadau. So many examples are there in support of this. And what we see, it has prakriti matra satta. There is a famous double slit experiment in quantum mechanics. There is an atom, atomic gun. Atoms are emitted. It passes through slit A and slit B, and behind that you see an interference pattern. And you ask the question, does it go through A or does it go through B? So if you observe with some instrument, you see it going through A, you see it going through B. If you don't observe, the quantum mechanics says don't ask the question because you have not measured. Say not. And the modern mechanics says it goes through both simultaneously. So going through A is prakriti matra satta because you have the prakriti of that. Going through B is a prakriti matra satta. You measure and you find it. But if you don't measure, then how can you say what it does? It is mysterious. Again, a lot can be said about it. I will end this discussion and move to that, what I mentioned, third category. The Satcheta, Asatteta, Sat Asat Vilakshana, that aspect I will now dwell a little more. There is, in the Indian tradition, Chatushkoti Nyaya. Before Shankaracharya, a Buddhist thinker flourished called Nagarjuna, and he gave this Chatushkoti Nyaya. Syat asti, asti, nasti, tad uvayam, asti nasti tad uvayam. No uvayam, na asti, na nasti, no uvayam. Syat asti cha, may be there. Syat nasti cha, may not be there. Syat asti, avyakta cha, is there, but can't describe. This is called as Saptabhangi Naya. Like question, is there an intelligent civilization in this universe? What is your answer? Syat asti, may be there. Syat nasti, may not be there. May be there, but I cannot describe how it is. Because the kind of life that we know exists on the planet may not be exactly the same kind of life that is there. So that possibility is there. So Professor Prashanti Chandra Mahalanobis, one of the famous statisticians of India, who founded the Indian Statistical Institute, he has written a paper. The theory of probability comes from this, Syat Asti, Syat Nasti. So the ancient seers and masters were aware of what is called as not only binary logic, but probabilistic logic. Again, a lot more can be said, but this important statement of Shankaracharya in Viveka Chudamani, Satna api, Asatna api, Ubhayatmikano, Ma Adbhuta, Anirvachaniya, Rupa iti Maya. There in mathematics, there is a law called law of excluded middle, LEM. We use it quite often in proofs, mathematical proofs. That is, either a proposition is true or a proposition is false. It cannot be both. Either it is true or it is false. If it is not true, it must be false. If it is not false, it must be true. So this is called application of LEM, law of excluded middle, no middle possibility. If you see the proof of square root of 2 is irrational, you see how it is proved. If you want to prove the proposition P, that square root of 2 is irrational, you assume the opposite proportion. You start with the assumption root 2 is rational. You don't want to prove root 2 is irrational. You assume the opposite, that root 2 is a rational number. And then you prove that this particular assumption leads to a contradiction. What we have actually shown is, if I assume that root 2 is rational, it leads to a contradiction in the number theory. But you have not proven that root 2 is irrational. So some logicians argue, all that you have proven is assuming that root 2 is rational, it leads to a contradiction. You have not proven that root 2 is irrational. Have you proven that root 2 has a non-terminating decimal expansion? You have not proven that. So there are some objections raised by philosophers, logicians, that this LEM must be rejected. And I think a few decades ago, a very eminent German-Austrian mathematician, Kurt Gödel, he proved a third concept, undecidability. He was in Princeton for many years. 1906 to 1978 was his period. He introduced the concept of undecidable proposition. They are known as Gödel's Incompleteness Theorem. So even if you are given a nice logical framework, a nice mathematical system, there are certain propositions which cannot be decided. That means you cannot prove they're false, you cannot prove they're true. Strange, when I read this, I was amazed about Shankaracharya's insight into this undecidability 1200 years ago. No mathematics, no logic, no set theory existed at that time. So Kurt Gödel introduced this concept of undecidability. Shankaracharya asked this question. Is Maya Sat? No. Is Maya Asat? No. Anirvachaniya iti. That question is undecidable. Now, one of the examples of, well-known examples of incompleteness theorem of Kurt Gödel is an old unsolved problem in number theory called Goldbach conjecture. Every even number greater than 2 is a sum of two prime numbers. This is what theorem says. Every even number. Every. That means all. Infinite sets. Every even number greater than 2. So you take, for example, 10, 7 plus 3, sum of two prime numbers. 12, 7 plus 5, sum of two prime numbers. 18, 11 plus 7, 13 plus 5. It is called as Goldbach conjecture. And they wanted to prove My God, centuries have passed, decades have passed, we have not been able to prove this. So to disprove this, they wanted to find out a counterexample. So using big computers, high performance computing with huge word length, maybe 64-bit, 128-bit, 256-bit, they have gone up to 10 to the power 15, 10 to the power 17, but still could not get a counterexample. Counterexample means at least one even number which cannot be expressed as sum of two primes. But how long will you scan? Because the number of numbers is infinite. It can never end. Then let us prove. If we cannot disprove, let us prove. No. Neither proved nor disproved. Undecidable. Many mathematical theories have such undecidable propositions. Third possibility. Sat, Asat, reject those two binary categories. Third possibility. Acharya has postulated brilliantly in his bhashya, Anirvachaniya iti maya, ma adbhuta rupa, karyanumeya, bhajyogya, yam jagat prasuyate. Now we'll come to the last part of my talk. I have eliminated a lot of other topics because I want to summarize at the end. One interesting question comes to all of us. Why is satyasya apihitam mukham? Why the truth is hidden from us? What is the reason? Why the face of the truth is covered? My basic answer to this question is that the reality is infinitely rich, is infinitely dimensional. Reality is infinitely rich. Satyam Jnanam Anantam, says Shruti. We often use the term Anantakoti Brahmandanayat Paramatma. Anantakoti. Infinite. In modern parlance, we say reality consists of all space and time scales. There is a Planck scale, 10 to the power minus 44 meter. And there is a Virata scale. Ano raniyam mahato mahiyan atmasutantu nihito guhayam. Same mantra comes in Shvetashveta also. Smaller than the smallest and bigger than the biggest. It is very interesting that the ancients were familiar with these huge time scales. You know that our puja starts with what statement? Vishnu 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 Radhaya Pravartamanasya Adya Brahmano Dvitiye Parardhe Shveta Varaha Kalpe Vaivasvata Manvantare Ashtavishanti Shame Kali Yoge Prasama Charane Bharata Khande. You see, you start with a Varardha and then come to that particular Muhurta. So our ancients were familiar with huge time scales. And now the modern cosmology has proven that the universe is about 13.7 billion years old. And the farthest galaxy in the observable universe is some 93 billion light years away. Virat. And that's why it was in ancient India the practice Sahasra Shirsha Purushaha Sahasra Saksha Sahasrapat Sabhumim Vishvatu Vrutva. See, Virat Purusha. Tasmat Virat Ajayata. The Purusha became Virata. So the ancient seekers were aware of this Virat space scale, Virat time scale, very huge. And number of years have passed. And also aware of extremely small. Anoraniyan, Mahato Mahiyan, Atmasatanto, Nihito Guayam, bigger than the biggest and smaller than the smallest. So the reality around you, Nihito Guhayam, and still it is inside you, the reality is infinitely rich. So rich it is that we really cannot grasp it. These days, scientists talk of multi-scale phenomena. Our ancient seers knew this aspect of reality. According to quantum mechanics, an atom is so small and is described by a complex valued wave function. And a wave function is infinite dimensional. So something smaller than the smallest is infinite dimensional. If you read some books on quantum mechanics, you will find that for a hydrogen atom, you come across a certain wave function, psi it is called, and it is infinite dimensional in the sense it can be expressed as a superposition of infinite number of eigenvectors. I will not go into the technicalities, but something so small requires infinite dimensions to describe. Another interesting mathematical object, which has these scales within scales within scales within scales within scales, is called a fractal. You can see this here, these triangles. You can keep on breaking that triangle into small, 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 small. So ultimately, the triangle consists of infinite number of small, 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 small triangles. This curve is called a fractal curve. This curve is neither one-dimensional, neither two-dimensional. Actually, its dimension is an irrational number between 1 and 2. And there are many problems in real life. For example, the boundary of a cloud is a fractal. A cloud you see is an approximation to that fractal. And the dimension of this particular triangle I showed you is logarithm 7 divided by logarithm 3. Can you imagine something not one-dimensional, two-dimensional, three-dimensional, but something in between? And has infinite scales. So what you see before you has infinite number of time scales. I gave you some Planck scale. I gave you cosmological scales. Our human body is supposed to contain 10 to the power 28 atoms. Imagine the complexity compacted in the human body. So the reality is infinitely rich. Another example I often give in my Jnaneshwari Pravachan, you see pictures of your favorite stars, their acting, movement, various colors changing with time on the TV screen. These days, people keep on seeing serials after serials, Kannada serial, Marathi serial, Hindi serial on a big screen, HD, high definition TV. And you get involved in that drama. Some people shed tears, some people get excited. What they see, either in the movie or on the TV screen. And all engineers know that a typical high definition TV screen has 2K by 2K, 4K by 4K pixels. Millions of pixels are there. Maybe 16 million, 10 million. So a TV screen has very large number of small pixels. And each pixel has three primary colors, R, Y, B, red, yellow, and blue. And there is an animation. That is, there is a rapid change of colors of millions and millions of pixels. That's what the electronic engineers will tell you. Extremely fine scale changes are taking place on the TV screen. But what you see is your star, is your actor, is a tree. You are seeing objects. A virtual reality is created before you. But fundamentally it is pixels, pixel, 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 and the color of the pixel is a function of time. Enormous amount of data is being streamed electronically. So our eyes are actually doing some kind of an averaging. It is technically called as coarse graining. We are not able to see all the small pixels because they are so infinitely rich. What we see is an overall picture. In technical term, it is called as coarse graining. And you get a pratiti, you get an experience. That is the pratiti matra satta. But at the bottom of this pratiti matra satta are these millions and millions and millions of pixels. I give a very simple example to many young people. When a young boy falls in love with a young girl, you are impressed by the color of the hair, the color of the skin, cheeks, and so on. But if you put a microscope on the cheek of your beloved, what you see are large number of holes through which drops of sweat are coming out. And so many bacteria are moving there. But when you withdraw the microscope, the fundamental reality is taken away from you. What you see is a very attractive reality, coarse-grained, statistically average reality. So at a fundamental level, sukshma, it is very different. But sthula, and what we get is the sthula pratiti, like a TV screen. And this is called as pratiti matra satta, because you get an experience of that. The different characters and the colors and the program that you see is pratiti matra satta. But at a fundamental level, millions and millions of pixels and animation, their colors changing. But with the help of microscope, of course, you can partly resolve the reality. So the infinitely rich reality is hidden from you because your organs of perception are very limited. You know that our vision is binocular. We can see depth, but we cannot tell which planet is away and which planet is closer, which star in the nakshatra mandala. We cannot. Similarly, I see only visible range of light. Full electromagnetic spectrum comes from the sun, but our eyes see only a visible window. Our ears, they also have an audible range. We cannot hear the sound below a certain frequency, above a certain frequency. Yes, it is true that some animals see better than us, hear better than us. So each sense organ, you can sense the taste of many eatables, but there are some chemicals for which we have no taste. Each sense organ that God has given us is a limited window to the world. So the Indriya Gochara Srishti is a tip of the iceberg. That's what the scientists say. Because the reality is infinitely rich. And you filter only a small part of it. And from the small part, tip of the iceberg, what is filtered, you infer what is beyond. And your inference suffers from what is called as Vyapti dosha. Vyapti dosha means that is not the Vyapti of your data. All of us, we are told by physicists, we live in the world of middle dimensions. Our world is middle dimensional. WMD, it is called as WMD, world of middle dimensions. Maybe few meters, some kilometers, and maybe few millimeters, but beyond that, no. Maybe some pala, ghatika, you know, you have pala, ghatika, prahara, ashtok prahara, dina, masa, varsha, ayana, 60 samvatsarats, then charana, then yuga, then manvantara, then kalpa, then parardha. So that we cannot see. So both in space and time, we are limited. Because of that, we are not able to see the reality in all its dimensions. The world of middle dimensions, after you perceive, you form theories. You say it must be there, it must not be there. You say it is confined to one space, one position. For example, all of you know that velocity and position, momentum and position are definite numbers in classical physics, because you see an object moving from position A to position B to position C. You see it has some mass and some velocity, so it has momentum. But we know that as you go to the finer scales, this concept of a reality is having a definite position and a definite momentum is falsified, because it is outside the world of middle dimensions. So the reality in front of us, created by the God Almighty, is infinitely rich in scales, and we therefore cannot perceive it. That is the veil of Maya. Satyasya apihitam mukham. Tatvam pushanna pavano satya dharmaya drishtaye. So, this concept of Mula Vidya, Tula Vidya, Vikshepa, Anyatha Khati, by now are partly clear. What is spread out in front of us, this vast universe, is infinitely rich. And we have pratyaksha jnana of a very limited part of the reality. Indriyartha sannikarsha janya jnanam pratyaksham, says Nyayadarshan. When your indriyas, organs, come in contact, sannikarsha, with what is outside, the jnana born out of it, knowledge, is pratyaksha jnana. And whole Vijnana Darshan is based on pratyaksha pramana and anumana pramana. Pratyaksha and anuman are the two pramanas. But pratyaksha jnana is very limited, because the reality that we see, experience, is infinitely rich in time scales, space scales, in every respect. So based on our pratyaksha jnana, this sthula jnana as it is called, or a gross level, limited in time scales and limited in space scales, there is a certain window in space scales that is available to us. Based on that, we have to infer what is outside. Something smaller, something very huge. Something anoraniyan, something mahato mahiyan. And when we do this inference beyond what we see only limited scales, that is karyanumeya, anumeya. And what is karyanumeya has been shown to be falsifiable, badhyogya and jnana nivarta. That is this play of Maya. Reality is so infinitely rich, it is hidden from us. Rightly said in Upanishad, Hiranmayana patrena satyasya apitam mukham tatvam pushanna apavrano. Almighty, please help me in removing that cover so that I will understand. That's why Advaita Vedanta often talks of avidya. There is a mool avidya. Reality being infinitely rich, it is hidden from us. There is nothing we can do. And then, because we only see a part of it, and we want to infer what is at very small scales, that is beyond the world of middle dimensions. It is called as sthula srishti, indriya gochara srishti. But at the adhisthana foundation of the Indriya Gochara Srushti is Indriya Agochara Srushti. And with the help of this buddhi, you are doing some thinking and some modeling of this Indriya Gochara Srushti, and that is subject to error, and you therefore think it is something else, that is vikshepa. So avaranaatmaka Shakti and vikshepatmaka Shakti are two very fundamental characteristics of Maya. Very fundamental. That's why in the famous Brahma Sutra Bhashya, Acharya makes a final closing statement. Tasmat avidya adhyarupita nirakarana matra brahmani kartavyam. What you have to remove is this veil of avidya. Tasmat avidya adhyaropana. There is an adhyaropana. There is a certain superimposition of our own mathematical model and the reality, as I have explained. We have to just remove that cover. Brahmani kartavyam. Natu Brahma Vijnane Yatnaha. No special effort is required for Brahma Jnana because it is Attanta Prasiddhatvat. It is Swayam Siddha. What has to be done is to remove the avidya. Simply put it, it means we have to remove the avidya, the so-called darkness and ignorance, because it does superimposition on the reality, adhyaropana. You know that in Gita, Lord Krishna has talked about avrutam jnanametena. I'm sure you must have heard this particular phrase. Dhumena vriyate agni vanni yatha darsho malena cha. From the 3rd chapter. Yatholve nyavruto garbha tatha tene idamavrutam. Just as the vanni, the fire is surrounded by dhuma, dhumena priyate vanni, yatha darshomalena cha, a mirror is covered with dust. Yatholve avruto garbha, like a garbha has some kind of a covering, tatha tene idamavrutam. Shankaracharya Bhashya, Tena Kamena idam jnanam avrutam. This jnana is surrounded by some kind of a cover. That's why idam jnanam avrutam. The next sloka maintains avrutam jnanametena jnanino nitya vairina. And this particular cover is the vairi, is the enemy of a person seeking jnana. So Gita talks about avrutam jnanametena, idam jnanam tena kamena avrutam, such words. I will summarize what I have said so far. I have a lot to say. I have not covered all the material I have prepared for this Advaita Academy, but I will summarize now. We of what I have said so far, we often use pratyaksha and anumana pramana, valid means of obtaining knowledge, for getting the knowledge of idam or aham. There is idam nishtha, there is aham nishtha. So either for inferring what the others have in mind for us, I have taken some examples in international politics about it. So either for getting the jnana, for idam and aham, we use pratyaksha and anumana pramana. Step number 1. Only very few of us, very gifted people, have the experience of aparokshanubhuti, direct knowledge. Aparoksha anubhuti, not paroksha. Paroksha is called as immediate knowledge. Aparoksha. Somebody tells you Himalaya is the tallest mountain in the world, so you get a paroksha jnana, but only when you see you get the aparoksha. So when very, very few people have this aparokshanubhuti. Both idam and aham, second point I made, are infinitely rich in details. There are infinite number of time scales, infinite number of space scales. Anoraniyam mahato mahiyan. Anu, and Virata. And our ancients were aware of these very large time scales. I also mentioned in our puja, we do that mantra. So the true nature of reality is therefore covered from us. That is the avarana shakti of Maya. Covering aspect. And that is also called as mool avidya, primordial ignorance. Our sense organs have very limited ability. Our windows to the world, which is called as chakshusha pratyaksha, ghranaya pratyaksha, sparshaja pratyaksha, shrutraja pratyaksha, rasana pratyaksha, this pratyakshana knowledge from these five senses have very limited capability. Like I illustrated the spectrum, electromagnetic spectrum, audio range, several examples I gave. Our sense organs have limited ability. They cannot see or feel something very fine and something large and very, very large structures. Based on what they see, they infer and formulate a theory, sometimes a mathematical model, which is always karya anumeya, inferred from the karya. It is inferential. All inferential knowledge is sublatable. Jnana nivarta. Jnana nivartya. Several examples I have taken that our theories are sublatable by more knowledge, more experiments. All inferential knowledge is paroksha, mediate. If there is no aparokshanubhuti, then it is mediate. So in English it is called as inferential, mediate, falsifiable, provisional, tentative. All our knowledge is provisional, tentative, falsifiable, inferential, jnana nivarta, paroksha, bhadavagya. So our theoretical models represent a reality which is in some sense an approximation to the so-called ultimate reality, and hence we get an asanna khyati, some kind of approximation. But when it is applied beyond the WMD, world of middle dimension scales, then it is falsified and we have to replace one asanna khyati by another asanna khyati. Next, the last comment about Acharya. We cannot say it is Sat because it is sublated. We cannot say it is Asat because we get Pratiti. So it is Sat, Asat, Vilakshana. Third category I mentioned. Undecidable. Sat, Asat, Vilakshana is the very nature of this Maya, Acharya says, and I have given an example from mathematical logic called undecidable propositions. So I have come more or less to the end of my talk here about the aspects of Maya. Just a last statement. Acharya classifies the reality into three categories: pratibhasika satta, vyavaharika satta, paramarthika satta. Actually, there is a hierarchy of realities, hierarchy of approximations, you see, I have seen. Vyavaharika satta, because we are able to do vyavahara in that. While paramarthika satta is what we call as that ultimate reality, which I have said is infinitely rich. And hence the prayer at the beginning of my talk yesterday, Hiranmayana Patrena Satyasya Apitam Mukham Tatvam Pushan Apavrunu Satya Dharmaya Drushtaye. O Almighty God, this infinitely rich truth is covered from us. Please help us so that we can march on the path of the truth. Satya Dharmaya Drushtaye. A wonderful mantra, a wonderful bhasha, a wonderful acharya, and of great help in learning science. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for another enlightening session and sharing with all of us uh, so much beautiful insights and clearing our misconceptions on Vedanta. So we have received 2 or 3 questions. So I request you to take them up. The first question is, where can we find the first reference to the term Maya in Indian Shastras, and in what reference it is talked about?
My knowledge shows that one reference is, of course, in Gita, Daivesha Gunamai Mama Maya Duratyaya, and even the last chapter, Brahmayan Sarva Bhutani Yantra Rurani Mayaya. Also in Shveta Shveta Upanishad, there is a mantra, it is called as Parashakti. There is a word Parashakti and says 2 forms, Balakriya Cha, that is, it is capable of doing some work. It is Jnana Shakti, called as Chit Shakti, and also it is Kriya Shakti. So, the Shakti of Parmeshwara is also described in Shveta Upanishad. But they don't use the word Maya there. They call it Shakti. But Gita very explicitly uses the word Maya. So far as my knowledge goes, Upanishads don't use the word Maya but hint at it. For example, this Hiranmayana Patrena Satyasya Apitam Mukham, this so-called covering aspect, which is hidden from us, Anauraniyan, Mahato Mahiyan, infinitely rich reality. So I think they have said something very, very equivalent to that.
I think if I may add, I remember that I think it was in Rigveda somewhere, Maya is used in the context of Indra. I think there the meaning is a little bit different. I mean, it is used in the sense of Indra's power or magic, but
Correct.
I read somewhere that they had used. So the next question is, uh, there is a famous concept of Triputi in Advaita philosophy, that is ultimately the subject, object, and the action becomes one. The seer seen and the seen becomes one. How can we understand this with the modern scientific approach?
Yeah, I think I must first say that modern science has just started understanding the conscious aspect. So far, the drashta or the gnata was outside the modern science. It was only idam nishtha. But with the advent of quantum mechanics, computer science, neurology, brain, understanding the human brain, understanding the prajna, the science has taken a step towards understanding the chit shakti. It has only so far bothered about prakritika shakti, which we measure in joules, watts, etc. But it has not devoted enough time to chit shakti, that is the gnata. So as the research progresses more and more into the chit shakti, our ancient rishis have said, Brahmavid Brahmaiva Bhavati, that stage will come. Vidyataram Are Kena Vijaniyat, you remember? Also, I think because you asked that question, let me give one technical answer. We are having this problem of Swaskandha Arohana Nyaya. You understand this? Swaskandha Arohana Nyaya. Just as we cannot sit on our own shoulder, we have to understand the Jnata, understand is the Jnaya, but the Jnata has to understand the Jnata. Vijnataram are kena vijnaniyat is what Brihadaranyaka says. So as we do more and more research on Vijnata, then we'll go to that stage, Brahmavid Brahmayava Bhavati.
Sir, the next question is, if reality is infinitely varied beyond apprehension, how do the realized people, how realized souls, so to speak, claim to know it? How far should they be believed?
I think best I will say, I will quote a doha from one famous saint of North India, डूबे सो बोले नहीं बोले सो अनजान. Those who are lost in that samudra, they don't speak. And those who speak don't know. Gairo prema samudra koi tare chatur sujan. Very deep. That is, Saint Jnaneshwar has given an analogy. A salt doll went to fathom the depth of the ocean and it got dissolved in it. So in the process of measurement, it got dissolved. So as long as this aham idam separation is there, these questions will bother us. Aham idam separation. Because it is the nature of aham to keep on asking the question. The very questioner has to dissolve. Yada panchavatiष्ठन्ते ज्ञानानि मनसा स बुद्धिन विचेष्टेते तामाहु paramam gatihi. Chidyate hृदय ग्रंथि vidyate sarva samshaya tasmin drushte paravare. So this last step that our seers have talked, you have to have first shraddha in it to realize. That is beyond our laukika anubhuti, but it is consistent with the laukika anubhuti. I give an example to my Jnaneshwari group. Suppose you want to calculate root 2 in terms of rational numbers. So we say 14 by 10, then 1414 by 1000. So we have an infinite sequence. Each term in the infinite sequence is rational, but the limit point of the infinite sequence is irrational. So Advaita is a limit point of a certain sadhana in the Dvaita world. And the limit point has characteristics different from every term in the sequence. That is the interesting part.
I think, viewers, if you have any more questions, now is the time to ask. We have received one more question, sir. I think we are almost out of time, so I request you to take this up. In Vedantic texts, we get to understand that Maya has different roles at the level of Vyasti and Samasti, particularly around Avarana Shakti. Then again, we are told that that which keeps you from absolute knowledge is Maya. So is it better to explain the world from the point of view of Maya, or is it better to assume a certain error in all my thoughts as arising from Maya and then analyze this error?
Correct. I think well said. There are some who interpret this as an error. Error meaning the gap between your understanding of the truth and the truth. So you can also, Niti, you know that English is not a suitable language for every word in Sanskrit. Like, for example, dharma, there is no suitable word in English. And religion is a very bad translation.
True.
Because they have come from the West. Similarly, This Maya. You told me yesterday that some people consider this to be illusion. It's a wrong translation. Illusion is not a correct word. So I think those who are more familiar with English can say it's an error. But it is an error without a hetu. You don't have a bad hetu. It is something we are not able to see because of the maryadas on us. There are certain inherent limitations. That is a finite, Simita soul is trying to understand the infinite, you see. So the gap between the two can be called as an error. It can be called as avidya, it can be called as ignorance, it can be called as maya. Maya in the sense, the infinite dimensional Paramatma is not revealing his full swarupa to you. It can be interpreted that way. You know, English is a, as I said, is a close and sometimes a bad approximation to Sanskrit words.
Thank you, sir. That's a very important clarification. I think we all need to keep this in mind that when we approach our Shastras in a English language especially, we need to always have to switch on a internal mental filter. You know, if you read, I remember, when we read the translations, often dharma, artha, kama is translated as sometimes as religion or law. Dharma is translated religion or law, artha as wealth, and kama as lust or desire. So we need to have an internal filter that it is actually referring to the purusharthas and not just in a very superficial sense the way it is translated. So,
Correct.
and this applies across all topics of Hindu religion, tradition, practices, whatever it is.
Correct.
So, yes, sir. So with this, we come to the conclusion of this weekend's Weekend with Wisdom. And on behalf of entire Advaita Academy and all our audience, I thank Dr. Deshpande ji for coming on our show, for sharing his thoughts and giving so much food for thought to think about Advaita, clarifying our lot of misconceptions about Vedanta, especially in the connection to Maya. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Viewers, stay tuned. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and we also have a Facebook group named Advaita Academy Discussion Group. Join the group. You can post your queries. You can discuss on these issues, and we will be announcing the next weekend's programs very soon. So stay tuned to get updates. Shri Guru Bhyo Namah.